Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Camille sat in her rocking chair. She was looking at old pictures and remembering the old days. There were pictures from when she was born. Looking at them, vivid pictures of memories and spinning in her head. Looking at the pictures from her childhood, she smiled, remembering her parents and their small house on the outskirts of town. Of the childhood pictures, one in particular stood out. It was of little Camille and a little boy named Stephen. The boy, dressed in tattered pants, had abrasions on his arm and face, but his kind smile burned on his face. Then as a child, no one thought that a friendship with a little bully would grow into a lifetime. Even Camille herself could not think how much pain and love this boy would bring at the same time. Stephen had looked up to her since childhood. Every day was spent in her company. She was the one who helped him with his homework. She would bandage his shattered knees and treat his wounds. Stephen's life didn't turn out much better from the script. He grew up in a family without a father. His mother said that he was away on a business trip and would return soon, but soon never came. The boy grew up, and the need for a father grew. Grandmother and mother could not give what his father had to teach. The family lived in poverty, barely making ends meet. Mother and grandmother worked hard. Stephen stayed home alone, took many walks and fought. His mother cried a lot, but hid her tears so that her only son would not see anything. She tried to give him everything she could. She taught him good manners, taught him to count and write, dreamed that he could escape from the bad life and make his life what he wanted it to be. One day, Mom noticed a change in her son's life. He started smiling more often, laughing, almost stopped fighting. Every night, Mom would check Stephen's lessons and through tiredness try to explain what he didn't understand. After she noticed that her son began to change, she saw the lessons done. On the weekend that fell, she decided to talk to her son. Saturday came. Emily, Stephen's mother, made his favorite pancakes. The boy was still asleep. Upon waking up, the boy smelled the aroma of his favorite pancakes. Getting up, he put on his slippers and ran to the kitchen. Mom was standing at the stove. Hugging his mom, he sat down at the table. On the table was a plate with a small mound of pancakes on it. Emily, having finished baking, poured tea for her son and decided to have a serious conversation. "I decided to bake your favorite pancakes. But how's school going? I see your grades are better. You've stopped fighting in the street. Son, tell me what happened. Maybe you met someone." "Mom, these pancakes are delicious. It's been so long since I've eaten them. Everything's fine at school. I got a B in math and a B in geography with Christopher. We were studying where the people of Africa live. On Friday in PE, we played soccer with the boys. I scored 2 goals. The boy ate pancakes and happily told his mom about his successes at school. He never lied to Mom and always shared his thoughts with her. "Yes, Mom, I met a girl. She transferred to us from another school. She's nice. She helps me with my homework and helps me with my wounds. Her name is Camille. A little girl with blue eyes and pigtails. She's very nice and funny, really." The boy laughed joyfully. His mother looked at him with a loving gaze as he waited for the last pancakes on his plate. "Son, and you introduced us. Bring her next weekend. We'll talk. I'll bake a cake. And most importantly, remember, never hurt her well." "Yes, Mom. I'll invite her next week." The wind rumbled behind the window. Small pebbles and branches rattled against the window. Camille realized she was dozing in her chair. She was dreaming of the clear silhouette of that boy from her memories when they were children. Evening was gradually descending on the city. There were fewer and fewer people on the streets. The streetlights were coming on. The room gradually filled with darkness. Camille was also sitting in her cozy armchair, covered with a plaid. She tried to remember what she had talked about with Stephen's mother. Why was Stephen embarrassed and blushing all night? At another question from his mom, the smile never left her face. She remembered being in their apartment so often afterward, remembered Stephen's grandmother baking pies and telling stories of her youth, and how Emily used to make jokes about the children. And the boy was immediately embarrassed. Scroll through another scene from the past. Camille found the strength to get up from her chair, walked over and flicked the light switch on. The room was filled with a nice warm light. She often sat in this room and reminisced about her life. She enjoyed reliving pleasant moments again, but only in her memories. Sometimes she wanted to put the pictures away, but she couldn't. She didn't want to once again lose the people who used to be important to her. Wiping the dust off the picture, she headed for the kitchen. The kettle's on button clicked and sat down at the table. The kettle was making the noise. As Camille reached for a mug, it boiled and turned off, plunging the room into silence. The next day, Camille decided to do a house cleaning of the sleeve sunsets. Taking a rag, she lost the pictures and all the furniture in the room. By chance, as she read another picture hung on the wall, that one came off with a resounding crack of glass. The picture frame shattered. Camille began to pick up large shards of parts of the collapsed frame. After picking up the broken parts of the frame, she picked up the photograph. There were 2 teenagers in it. Camille and Stephen were about 15 years old in the picture. Camille remembered that time very well. How had Stephen started working from the fact that his grandmother had gotten sick and he had decided to take over the responsibilities collapsing on his mom? Camille remembered very well how often they fought about nothing, but the desire to lose each other always came to the forefront. Stephen always apologized first when he asked for forgiveness. His cheeks poured a lardy color. Camille loved it. She hugged him, knowing that everything would work out and they would overcome everything together. Stephen spent a lot of time at work, taking on any job, sweeping yards, working as a loader, cleaning old people's houses. The money he received was small, but it was a great help to Mom. Camille rarely saw the boy. They began to see each other less often. The long separation made her heart ache. She was afraid that their last meeting might be fatal. After a while, she started showing up at her job just to see him. She'd bring his favorite cheese and sausage sandwiches. All her life, she would make him those sandwiches. But back then, as a child, Camille could never have imagined such a thing. Stephen worked hard and his progress in school was negative. Camille spent all her free time trying to get Stephen up to speed on his subjects. Rarely was money given out when they would go for a walk, coming to their spot in the park, talking about everything. Stephen would tell funny stories and Camille would laugh. They were good together. At one point, she realized that their friendship was turning into something special. She started to notice things she hadn't seen before. She liked everything about him. The way he talked, the way he acted, his thick, dark hair, his big brown eyes, the mole on his right cheek. She was hurt and scared when Stephen got into conflicts with his peers. But the biggest fear became telling her how she felt. Every day at home, she replayed the conversations in her head, but the feeling of fear never left her. The fear of losing the person she loved was taking over the situation. Stephen was experiencing the same feeling of fear of losing his beloved or hearing a negative answer to the proposal to be together were spinning in his head. But it could not go on like this for long. Pulling himself together, overcoming his fear, Stephen decided to talk about his feelings. He made an appointment. Even now, Camille remembers that day. It was the 28th of May. Stephen called her after school and told her to come to the park in the evening to their place. When he spoke, his face was serious. It scared Camille a little. She wondered if today was the day he would decide to leave. What does he want to tell me? Why didn't he decide to talk now? All day long, she lay on the sofa thinking about what she wanted to say to her beloved. At these thoughts, she began to fall asleep. Her head was miserable. She decided to lie down. Waking up, looking at the clock, she started to get ready for the meeting. Leaving the house, she took a quick step towards the park. Her heart was beating fast. Her breath cleared. She was scared, but she kept walking forward. Stephen was already standing at the appointed place. He was intensely nervous. Determined phrases were rolling around in his head. He knew what he was getting into and what he was about to go through. When he saw Camille, he smiled. Noticing this, Camille chuckled. He stepped closer, pulled himself together, and said in a firm voice, "Hi, it's good to see you. You know, you and I go way back. You helped me a lot back then, and now I see how much you care when I fight. I'm afraid to admit one thing I'm afraid to admit to you. For weeks now, I've been walking around thinking about how to talk to you about it. Seeing you makes my thoughts gather in a clod, and I can't explain it properly." Camille's cheeks lit up in a red flame. Did her secret feelings prove to be mutual? Stephen did not finish, but she knew how this conversation would end. He was blushing too. His ears burned like the bright sun. It amused her to watch his ears blazing with fire. He fell silent for a moment. There was an awkward silence. Camille wanted to say something, but just as she opened her mouth to utter the first words, Stephen spoke. "We've known each other since we were children. I remember the day we met. I remember that little girl in the red dress. Your pigtails and your bright blue, burning eyes. Your eyes still burning to this day. Looking into them makes me blurry. Camille, I like you." Before he could say anything, he felt small warm hands on him. Camille had her arms around his neck and was quietly flapping her nose. He hugged her hard. There was no limit to his joy. He had received reciprocation for his words, even though she had not said a word. Warm tears flowed down Camille's face. She was glad that the feeling was mutual. She continued to hang on his neck. Her legs felt like absorbent cotton. They stood like that for about 10 minutes, embracing. Camille looked into his eyes. The guy was smiling. "Stephen, I'd like you for a long time too, but I've been afraid to tell you. Afraid of losing you. I've never felt this way before." Finish. She hugged him again, taking his hands. The lovers went for a walk in the park. They talked, laughed, joked. Camille could not and did not want to let go of his hand. They spent the whole evening together. Dusk gradually descended over the city. There was hunger in the streets. Stephen offered to walk Camille home. The thought of parting even briefly upset both of them. They agreed to meet tomorrow when Stephen came home from work. The closer they got to the house, the slower their steps became. As they approached the driveway, Stephen gave his lover another hug and Camille kissed him on the cheek with a smile and a great mood. Stephen headed home. Once inside the apartment, Camille ran into the room and hugged the big teddy bear that Stephen had once given her, and a little bear, and imagined her favorite boy. Remembering this story, Camille put the picture on the table. The smile never left her face. The memories spun like a movie. She glanced at the closet. There, a large teddy bear sat in its place. His fur was squished in places, his eye had fallen off, and had been lost in the move. But the gift that was important to her was still there after all these years. There was a whole box of his gifts in her closet. Camille saved and cherished each one. The children grew up fast. Their feelings grew stronger. Camille knew she wanted to spend the rest of her life with this man. Stephen worked, helped his family, but never forgot his beloved for a moment. Every day after work, he would pack up and come to Camille's yard. They walked, swung on the swings, and talked a lot. Time flew by unnoticeably past days, weeks, months, years. After graduating from high school, Camille wanted to apply to a neighboring city to study design at a university. Stephen was about to go into the army. Camille promised to wait for him, but being separated for a whole year worried her. There was a whole summer ahead of them, but the couple feared there would be little time. Camille offered to go into town with her for a few days to apply for college. Stephen worked for several days without a day off to raise the necessary amount of money for the trip. When he came home, he was exhausted. In the morning, he got up and went to work again. The long-awaited day had arrived. Emily gave Stephen some of the money she had saved. The son did not take the money for a long time, but his mother persuaded him. Meeting Camille at the entrance, the boy took the bags and headed towards the train station. After going through the ticket check, they entered their carriage. "Camille, cheerfully paced ahead, stepping into her compartment. Stephen put away his things and sat down in his seat. His beloved's eyes burned with new adventures. The train moved on. With each passing second, they got farther away from their hometown. Bed to bed, Camille took a book in her hands and plunged into a fascinating reading of her favorite novel. Stephen went out into the corridor and looked at the glimmering forests of the fields. He loved the scenery they passed by on the train. He loved his girlfriend, but realized he was leaving her alone for a whole year. Walking into the compartment, Stephen noticed that Camille had fallen asleep with a book in her hands. Inserting a bookmark into the book, he put it away on the shelf. Taking a blanket, he covered his girlfriend from the seat next to him. The clatter of the wheels put the mind to sleep, and Stephen did not notice how he began to fall asleep. They slept through the evening. Through sleep, Stephen smelled the odor of fresh emergency tea. Opening his eyes, he saw his girlfriend entering the compartment with 2 glasses of tea. Later, he woke up. "I thought you'd be asleep all the way. I made you some black tea. How do you like it?" "I woke up and really wanted a mug of hot tea. The hardest part was getting out from under you. Why did you sleep sitting up? Why didn't you go to your bed?" "I didn't want to sleep, but when I tucked you in and sat next to you, fatigue got the better of me. And I didn't notice how I fell asleep. Did you mind my company?" "No, it's fine. I'm glad you were there for me even so. But you're tired." She came quite close, put the glasses on the table, and kissed him on the forehead. The tea was delicious, the way he likes it, strong, overboiled, black with sugar. They drank the tea and looked out over the passing little villages of the plain, the dense forests. It was beginning to grow dark outside. Every minute it became harder to see something in the window. She climbed under the covers and pressed herself against Stephen. The guy looked at his watch and said, "In 2:00 we'll be there. Soon we will start a new life. But how are you ready to study at the university, to go to classes? Spending sleepless nights studying. Living in a dorm with 1 tomb. I'm scared. Since we were little kids, we've been close. And now I'll be alone. But I think we'll make it. I'm not afraid to study. Think about who helped you with your homework. When you come back from the army, I hope you'll go to college too. We'll rent a small apartment and live together. Just 1 year, and we'll be together." Having finished the phrase, she pressed herself against Stephen. He, in turn, hugged her and kissed her on the top of her head. An hour later, the conductor came in and announced that their station would be in 45 minutes. Stephen began to gather the unfolded items into a bag and check that nothing had been forgotten. It was pitch dark outside. The time was nearing midnight. At the beginning of the first of the night, the train screeched to a screeching halt. The couple began to move toward the exit. Saying goodbye to the conductor, they moved towards the train station. Walking through the station, Stephen caught a cab, and they drove to a pre-booked hotel. The city was ablaze with bright lights. Crowds of people strolling through the night streets. Noisy music came from the clubs. The city was alive with nightlife. The feeling of sleep was gone. I wanted to walk the streets of the town, to feel the cool night breeze. The cab pulled up to the hotel at a leisurely pace. The driver helped to take the bags out of the trunk, said goodbye, and drove away. Stephen took the bags and headed for the hotel desk. Camille held the door for him to get through the door. At the front desk, they grabbed their room key and headed there. Once inside the elevator, the girl pressed the button and the doors closed. As the elevator started moving, there was an uncomfortable feeling in her lower abdomen, but it passed quickly. On the door of the room in huge numbers was written 1478. Opening the door, they entered the room. The view from the hotel window was breathtaking. From the 14th floor, you could see the whole city. Having unpacked some of the necessary things, Camille headed for the shower, while Stephen continued to admire the view from the window. An hour of waiting and listening to the singing in the shower passed as Camille stepped out. Stephen stared at her without taking his eyes off her. She was extraordinarily beautiful. Walking up to her, he put his arms around her, and they merged in a passionate kiss. After hugging her, he picked up his things and headed for the shower. Stephen didn't like being in the shower for long. He didn't want to drink either. 10 minutes after leaving, he returned. Camille was sitting on the bed listening to her hair. Droplets from her hair were oozing down her shoulder. Walking over to the nightstand, Stephen took out his watch and looked at the time, 2:00. Stephen decided to inquire about the plans for the day so that he could plan everything properly. "Tell me, what are the plans for tomorrow?" "Tomorrow, or rather today, we have to get up early, take the documents to 3 universities, and then we are free. We can walk around the city, we can go to a museum or a movie. It depends on how it works out. We have 3 whole days before we go home. I want to go everywhere. There's an amusement park nearby. We'll go for a ride. And in the evening, we can go to the fountain. They say it's beautiful at night. Or did you have something in mind?" "No, I like your options. Tomorrow we'll go to the university first, and then we'll decide where we'll go. Then let's go to bed. We have a long day ahead of us tomorrow." Camille smiled and finished drying her hair, putting away the hairdryer comb. She turned off the light and lay down next to Stephen. She wanted to get warm. As she came with cold skin to Stephen, goosebumps ran down his back. He put his arms around her, and she started kissing and biting his neck, then on his cheek. Taking the initiative, Stephen kissed her passionately on the lips. She reciprocated. They savored each other. Passion grew at breakneck speed. They kept each other awake until 0:00. Morning came. The warm rays of the sun woke up, passing through the window. Waking up, Stephen admired the sleeping girl. All the beauty was ruined by the ringing of the alarm clock. The girl woke up and reluctantly rolled over to the other side. Stephen gently bit her neck and she laughed. "Beloved, it's time to get up. A new day awaits us. Lots of plans for today. Come on, get up, or I'll bite you until you get up. Let the day wait for someone else. Biting is illegal." She laughed and threw back the blanket, getting out of bed. She walked over to the window. Her beautiful body in the sunlight broke into Stephen's head. He followed her, hugging her from behind, kissed her neck, and headed to wash up. Camille headed after him. In the shower, they splashed from the towel fight. After getting out of the shower, Stephen began to get dressed and looked for a suitable place for breakfast. The clock showed 7:42. Gathering, the couple left the room. They closed the door and went to the elevator. Stephen remembered the feeling from yesterday when the elevator touched down. Stepping into the elevator, Stephen pressed the button. Again, the unpleasant feeling in his lower abdomen visited him. Once outside, they moved towards a small cafe that was across the street from them. A great breakfast and a good vibe waiting for them around the corner. Over breakfast, Stephen tried to determine the quickest way to get to First University. Camille trusted him and knew he would do a better job at this task. After finishing breakfast, Stephen waited for his beloved to finish her coffee so they could drive. The shortest and quickest way was to call a cab, which they did. When they reached the massive building, Stephen paid the cab driver and they got out of the car. Crowds of young people were going in and out of the university building. Camille caught a slight uneasiness. She clung to her boyfriend and stepped inside. Taking a folder of papers, she kissed Stephen and entered the admissions office. 40 minutes passed, she walked out. The smile on her face was brightening. There was a creative assignment, and I was able to do it. In fact, I think they liked me. Good for you. You were the first one out. I knew you could do it. The second university isn't too far away. We can walk to it, take a little stroll. As they left the building, they admired its size. Camille held her boyfriend's hand and followed him. They walked a few blocks, past a beautiful park with fountains, a small alley, and a group of street musicians playing. The rest of the way, Camille hummed the motif of that song. They'd reached the second university. Several blocks of one building opened before their eyes. Stephen escorted his favorite audience and himself flew to a small flower stall, which he saw when they passed the alley. After buying a bouquet of daisies, he ran in the opposite direction. As soon as he entered the university from the door of the auditorium, Camille appeared. He ran up to her and gave her the flowers. Camille blushed in surprise. "But how did you do on the assignment? I see you weren't the first one out this time." "It's okay." "Yes, it's fine. Thank you for the flowers. They're very beautiful." The assignment was harder this time, and the teachers were more demanding. But I was able to complete the assignment. Good for you. Now we get on the bus. We go to the last university, and we are free. They left the building, and the bus stop was in front of the university. The bus approached. Getting on it, Camille sat in an empty seat, and Stephen stood next to her. After 5 stops, they went outside. The warm sun was shining. Camille was walking and smelling the flowers. When they reached the building, they saw a map on it. The location of the whole buildings were scattered on several streets. The main building is a small building with sculptures. At the entrance to this university, Stephen was not allowed in, and he stayed outside waiting for his girlfriend. A warm summer breeze swayed the leaves on the trees, blowing hats off the passers-by. Stephen sat down on a bench and began to look around. Next to him on another bench sat an elderly couple. Stephen knew that in dozens of years, they would also be sitting on a bench in the park and feeding pigeons, and their grandchildren would be running around nearby. Suddenly, Camille approached from the back. She was smiling. Stephen hugged her and began to ask her how it went. "Now we'll wait to see what college I'll be accepted to. I'm sure you'll get into all of them." 3. "But which one will you choose?" "I don't know yet. While there's time, I'll think about it." She took Stephen by the hand, and they walked towards the park. In the park, they walked along the sidewalks, feeding bread to the ducks in the little pond lying on the grass, looking at the clouds floating by. Camille lay on his lap and enjoyed the moments they spent together. In the afternoon, they went to the hotel to change, get everything they needed, and head out to the amusement park. After getting ready, they grabbed a bite to eat and drove to the park. They arrived there. The first thing Camille decided to do was to ride the slides ride. Her hair was standing on end. Camille laughed. She was enjoying it. Walking around the grounds, Stephen noticed the shooting range. Said he'd be back in a minute. He went to win the coveted prize. 10 out of 10 shots. He won a small stuffed rabbit. After taking the rabbit, he ran to his girlfriend to present the gift. At that moment, Camille was studying the park map on the banner. Stephen came up behind her, covered her eyes with his hand, and held the rabbit under her t-shirt. When her sweetheart guessed who had come up behind her, he turned her around and presented her with the toy. She smiled and hugged him. They walked around the park for a few more hours, ate cotton candy, rode the rides, and went to a little show. Stephen took a ride on the dreaded slides. Camille was afraid to go on them. It was not long before evening came, and the lanterns and lights of the park began to come on. The lovers were exhausted. They sat down on a bench and just looked at the night lights of the city in the distance. Camille was hungry, and they headed to a small restaurant to have dinner. Once they arrived at the restaurant, they placed their order, and for the rest of the evening, they just sat and chatted about the future. No one could disturb their idyll. After finishing dinner and paying, they drove to the hotel. The power was out, but the lights in their room went out well past 0 o'clock. For a couple more days, they just relaxed, walking around, having fun, talking. Went a few times to the movies, theaters, museums, but the little vacation was coming to an end. Camille did not want to leave. She wanted to stop time, to stay with her beloved. Back in her hometown, Stephen began to work, and Camille waited for an answer from the institutes. A month later, the answer came. She was accepted to 3 universities she had applied to, but she chose the one she had originally applied to. Stephen was insanely happy for her. In August, they started packing. Camille was packing for the move, and Stephen was packing for the army. They were leaving on the same day, but in different directions. Standing on the platform, Camille did not want to let her boyfriend go. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. She was scared to leave alone without him. Stephen hugged Camille's mother and grandmother and went to the train car. He promised to call every minute as soon as he could. A few hours later, Camille was standing on the platform. She was being seen off by her parents, Stephen's mom, and his grandmother. They had been family friends for so many years and knew about the children's attitudes. Stephen had joined the border guard. The service was not a hardship, but there were few phone calls. Camille missed him, sometimes cried, but she waited. Making her own calendar, she crossed off the days that had passed. She excelled in her studies, applied for an increased scholarship. She liked her studies, but she was sad that her loved one was not around. Camille opened her dresser and pulled out her red diploma, and with it a photo album from her last year. How beautiful she was, young. Now she was a grandmother. The knowledge she had gained at university, she remembered every day of her studies. How classmates tried to disrupt her classes. Those were her years of youth, the years of her true and only love. Tired, she sat down in her chair and began to leaf through the album, remembering her classmates and teachers. Many were gone now, but the memory of them would always be there. Leafing through the album, she came across an old photograph. It had dark hair on it, and a guy in a military uniform flipped the photo over. She read from the border with love. "I'll be home soon." This picture had been sent to her by Stephen from the army. Memories came flooding back to her. She remembered vividly the day he had returned. It was a beautiful summer day. Camille was going to meet her beloved from the army. She had come home the other day to meet him. She sat at her small table and put on her makeup. On the table was a mirror on which she had pinned a picture. He had sent it over the winter. The emotion was overwhelming. Would he really come soon? Would she be able to hug him? There were still a couple of hours to go before the train arrived. But Camille already felt that she was late. She had been on her feet since early morning. On this day, she didn't want to be late. She realized that they would have a couple of days and would have to leave again for school. Camille believed that Stephen would leave with her. Suddenly, her mom came into the room. "Are you ready? It's an hour and a half before we get there." I almost didn't notice how the time flew by. "I'll be out of here in a minute, and then we can go." "Okay, we'll be waiting for you downstairs. Hurry up and get dressed and come downstairs." Mom left the room, and Camille began to dress in a frantic hurry. At least there was enough time left to get everything done. She didn't want to be late. Locking the door with the key, she ran down the stairs of her heart, starting to gain momentum of acceleration. Opening the entryway door, she saw her parents talking to Stephen's mom and grandmother. She walked over to them and gave them a hug. Everyone was smiling and joking around. His favorite girl, his future wife, was now by his side. Watching the movie, his eyes began to close and Stephen fell asleep. A couple more days passed, and they were packing their bags again. Camille was on her way to study, and Stephen was on his way after her, having applied to a technical university. He had enrolled as a part-time student as an engineer. After saying goodbye to their parents, they left for new adventures. The first month seemed like hell. Stephen looked for a job, went through dozens of interviews and internships, and one day he got lucky. The director of a large company was interested in his resume. Stephen got a part-time job to work and study at the same time. 2 months later, he proved himself and was transferred to a full-time position. The first session ended well with a few B's and other A's, allowing him to apply for an increased scholarship. On the edge of town, Stephen found a nice apartment, taking Camille with him. They had moved out of their dorms. Family life didn't seem so difficult. Stephen often gave flowers and gifts, and Camille cooked deliciously and kept the house and her future husband's head clean and organized. Stephen was a hard-working guy. He did not refuse to work extra hours and stayed late. That's why his boss saw him as a prospect. In the winter, Stephen was promoted. With small steps, he was moving towards his dream. He knew that a couple years would pass and everything would be perfect. On the weekends, he took work home. Camille would see him working and just be right next to him in the same room. Stephen gave all of his free time from work to his beloved. Several times they traveled home. One day, Stephen's parents raised the question of the wedding date. Camille replied that they wanted a summer wedding in their small rented apartment. Stephen made a box and cut holes in it. After his paycheck, he saved money for the wedding. Time flew inexorably forward. Camille worked on the design assignments she had been given at school. Stephen spent days at work. The box was slowly filling up. Camille had always wanted a princess wedding. She envisioned herself in a lush white dress and her fiancé in a beautiful black suit. She didn't know then how much pain and disappointment the man she loved could bring. The end of spring was approaching. The lovers were preparing for summer exams. Camille finished her projects, and Stephen sat with his textbooks. Having passed the exams, they began to prepare for the wedding. Choosing a restaurant took a lot of time. Camille wanted her wedding to be the best. Camille and her friends went shopping and picked out a dress. The wedding date was set for the end of July. Camille was looking forward to the date like a little child. The routine of preparations consumed the lovers, but they were happy. No one could think that the communication of a little girl and a bully will turn into a lifetime. Camille decided on the restaurant where the wedding would be held. Having made an appointment with the administrator, she left to socialize. In the meantime, he picked out his suit. He knew he was getting married once and for life. Excitement overwhelmed him. He was afraid of doing something wrong. Not even in the army was as scary as getting ready for a wedding. The long-awaited day came. Camille sat at her small table and put on her makeup. Her friend's mom sat next to her. Excitement overwhelmed her. She was very nervous. Stephen left in the morning to finish the final preparations for the day. His mom and grandmother came into town, two people who had been through a lot to get him back on his feet. Meeting them at the train station, he drove them home and left. Camille, having met the groom's parents, was happy to see them. Emily told stories from her wedding with her father Stephen. They laughed a lot, and the feeling of excitement was gone. Camille was ready. At the appointed time, they began to walk outside. The bride got into a stolen car driven by her father. Upon reaching the registry office, Camille almost cried, but managed to hold back her tears. Her father took her hands and kissed her. "You look beautiful today. I am happy for you that you have found the man you will walk through life with. You are the best. I just want you to know that. From now on, you're gonna have a different last name. You will have your own family, but you will always be my little daughter to me." Dad got out of the car and opened the door for Camille, helped her out with a summer breeze, picked me up. She was excited for the first time in her life. She was getting married. A few friends came up to her and started asking her about her condition. She had finally calmed down. There was no reason to be nervous anymore. People gradually flocked inside the building, settling into their seats. They talked about the lives of the young ones. The groom was already standing at the altar. He was visibly nervous, but tried to hide it as much as possible. When all the people were seated, the solemn music played. Camille entered the hall with her father on her arm. She smiled, a little embarrassed by the large number of people looking at her. Father was walking and holding back tears, and he was a series of tasks. The mom, sitting in the front row, was also crying. Finally, their children were becoming one family. Her father walked her down the aisle, kissed her hand, and left for his seat next to Camille's mom. The registrar began to speak. It was as if the couple in love didn't notice her. They looked into each other's eyes and thought of escaping from here as soon as possible. The registrar asked the main question, "Camille, do you agree to marry Stephen?" "I do." "And do you, Stephen, agree to marry Camille?" "I do. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you man and wife." The whole room applauded. Mothers cried, friends shouted, and congratulated. A chorus shouted bitterly. The newlywed couple merged into kisses. Invited guests began to come up and congratulate them. Camille felt an indescribable emotion. After the registration, they headed to the restaurant. All afternoon and evening, Camille and Stephen listened to congratulations from everyone. They had fun, participated in contests from the Toastmaster. Tons of gifts were accepted. Grandma gave the most touching speech about the young couple's life. Even Stephen could not hold back tears. Everyone was having fun, singing, dancing, congratulating the young ones. At night, the young went to the central square to meet the dawn with friends. Camille looked indescribable in the rays of the morning sun. Stephen could not take his eyes off her. He went over and kissed her. Meeting the dawn, they went to their hotel room to spend that night just the two of them. The tender, passionate cries of the young ones echoed outside the hotel door. They were savoring these moments. They were having a good time together. No one could ever interrupt their idyll. A couple of days later, Stephen accompanied his mother and grandmother to the train. Camille couldn't make it. Stephen knew that now everyone would be gone and a new work week would begin. After seeing his parents off, he headed towards home. On the way, he bought a small bouquet of daisies, came home, and gave it to his beloved. Camille had been sitting at her school books all day. When she saw the flowers, she got excited and took her mind off her books. Stephen suggested going for a walk. The weather was beautiful outside. After thinking about it, Camille agreed. She enjoyed spending time with her favorite person. They left the house and went for a walk along the embankment. Stephen bought his wife some cotton candy, which she loved so much. When they came to an ice cream stand, Stephen bought 2 popsicles. Camille loved to smear Stephen's nose with ice cream. All afternoon, they walked along the promenade. In the evening, it got a little colder. Stephen put his sweater on Camille, and they went into a small cafe. After dinner, they moved towards home. Camille did not want to go home. Her school books and notebooks were waiting for her at home. The next day, Stephen left for work in the morning. At lunchtime, Camille left the apartment. She was a little late for her classes. She closed the door and flew to the university. In the afternoon, Stephen was called in by his boss. "Hi, Stephen. You're new to the company and you're doing well. After consulting with my colleagues, I've decided to promote you to deputy head of department. You can pack your bags and move into office 1428. Thank you, John. I won't let you down. I'll have the project ready this week. The financial reports for the project are in and waiting to be signed." "Good. Okay. I'll check in with you today. But you get packed up and move to the 14th floor." Stephen came out of the study. He was glowing with happiness. The first thing he did was to call Camille and tell her what had happened. At that time, she was running in search of the right classroom. Stephen said they would discuss everything at home, wished her a good day, and hung up. All day, Stephen carried documents and boxes from office to office. The way was several floors, but it did not scare him. He walked up and down the stairs. The elevator was a long wait. In the old office, he packed his things into boxes, knowing that he would have to put them back on the shelves again later. He liked the new office from the 14th floor. It had a great view of the city. From this floor, people seemed tiny. The little passing cars would pile up in traffic. It was funny to watch. The day flew by. My arms were falling off. Stephen decided to use the elevator to go downstairs. When he got into the elevator and pressed the button, the doors were about to close, when some girl shouted for him to support the elevator door like a true gentleman. He managed to stop the door. A beautiful girl entered the elevator. He tried to remember who it was, but in the time he had been working for the company, he had never seen her once. A tall blonde in heels stood in front of him. Jacket and skirt looked great in combination. He took his eyes off her and began to look at the brochure on the elevator wall as he exited the building and got into his car. The girl's silhouette wouldn't leave his mind. He couldn't figure out what it was that she could have gotten him hooked on. At that moment, the phone rang. It was a message from his wife. She was asking when he was coming home. Thoughts of the girl slipped from his mind. Stephen started the engine and headed home. Upon entering the house, Stephen smelled odors coming from the kitchen. He took off his jacket and headed there. Camille was standing at the stove. He walked up behind her and kissed her neck. She smiled. "Hi, honey. How was your day? How's your new office? Tell me about it. I'm wondering what my husband does now, aren't I? Wash your hands and sit at the table. Stephen washed his hands and went back to the kitchen. There was pasta in a bowl on the table. He sat down at the table. His wife sat across from him. It's been a hard day. I'm very tired of running from one floor to another. I'm now the deputy head of the department. Essentially, the duties are the same, but now there are more people under my command. The office is large, spacious. It has a beautiful view. Would you like it? My bosses appreciate me. I'll finish my project this week and start a new job. How about you? How was your day? From what I heard, you were late for school again today. You know how long I'm in the shower. I can't help it. I'm doing great at school. I finished my term paper today. By the way, I'd already chosen my thesis advisor. It's the teacher who took my test when I entered. He's a jolly little man who tells stories from his life. But when it comes to his subject, he's strict and attentive. When they had eaten, Stephen helped wash the dishes, while Camille cleared the table. After dinner, Camille decided to turn on some movie, and Stephen went to shower under hot water. He remembered that silhouette of the girl again. Something about her clung to him on that. Trying to forget, he stepped out of the shower. The room was quiet. The television was broadcasting almost silently. Stephen walked over to his wife and saw that she was curled up and sleeping peacefully. Stephen picked her up in his arms and carried her into the room. He went back to the hall, opened his laptop, and started to finish the project. At 2:00, his eyes began to close, but Stephen wanted to finish the project. He heard a balloon and footsteps on the floor. Turning around, he saw his wife. She could barely open her eyes, was wrapped in her favorite blanket already 2:00. Let's go to bed. I woke up and you're not around. Let's call it a night. Finishing her sentence, she looked at her husband with a loving gaze. There were no options left. Stephen saved the file and closed the laptop. Picking his wife up on his arm, he left with her for the bedroom. The nasty sound of the alarm clock interrupted his sleep. Stephen woke up. His body was still asleep, but he had to get up. His wife was quiet, howling beside him. He kissed her and went to wash his face. When he washed his face, he went to the kitchen to make himself some coffee. Putting the turka on the stove, he waited for the coffee to boil, poured it into his mug, took some milk from the refrigerator, poured it into the coffee. The coffee allowed him to open his eyes. The body was triggered. Outside the window was rainy weather. It was freezing. Stephen opened the window to let the smell of ozone fill his apartment. An extraordinary odor filled the dwelling. Stephen went into the room. His wife was still asleep, having taken everything he needed from the closet, and he went into the hall. Putting on his suit, he drank his coffee and went to the exit. Taking the elevator down, he got into the parking lot. The car was parked right in front of the elevator exit. Stephen started the engine, turned on some music, and just sat there listening to the morning news on the radio. He pulled out of the parking lot. There was a large congestion of cars gathering on the road because of the nasty weather. There was just enough time to make sure he wouldn't be late. He decided to bypass the small traffic jam and turn to a gas station. After paying for gas, he bought another glass of coffee. It was a sleepy morning. He hadn't felt like this in a long time. When he got into his car, he started the engine and drove towards work. Parked his car. He got out and met his new colleagues in the sector. Hey, boss. So, what are the first orders of the day? The men laughed. Stephen picked up their mood and laughed too. Guys, I'm not your boss. Just because I got promoted doesn't mean anything. We're working at the same pace. One of these days we'll get the paperwork signed, and I'll finish the project. And then the stranger from yesterday caught their attention. She got out of her car and headed toward the exit. There was a moment of silence in the company of men. Their gazes were fixed on her. As she passed by, she said hello and smiled. The company reciprocated and greeted her as well. As she stepped into the elevator, Stephen decided to see who it was. Now, Robert, you know everyone in the office. Who is she? What department is she from? It's just that when I left work yesterday, she was leaving the elevator from the 14th floor too. Robert just shrugged. He wondered who she was. Kevin jumped in. That's the new girl from the billing department. She recently transferred to us from another branch. They say she's a head case to get things done. She's right. She was on the 14th floor yesterday. They have an office around the corner from your door. It's 8:50 on the clock. The guys crowd the elevator. As they cracked jokes, they started their new day at work. Camille woke up at 10 o'clock. Her husband had long since left for work. The wonderful smell of ozone and coffee was flying through the house. She took a little turn. Stephen had forgotten to close the window. She didn't like to be cold. Threw a blanket over herself. She moved out to close the window. There were no pairs at the university today. She'd done all her homework. She decided to take a day off. True, her lover wasn't around to take a complete break from the daily routine. She made herself breakfast, picked up her favorite book, and sat down at the table. The combination of her favorite food and a book was insanely appealing to her. After finishing her breakfast, she tore herself away from the book and began to clear the table. Outside the window, the rain intensified. She loved this kind of weather. It was overcast, raining. There was something about this day that was so indescribably romantic. She searched the TV for her show she'd left off last weekend. Lightning began to flash outside the window. Loud peals of thunder flew over the city. All the stronger ones plunged into the blankets, found her soap opera, tucked the book under the pillow, and started watching. Stephen sorted the remaining things out of the boxes, arranged everything in its order. He sat down to work. There was nothing left to finish the project. In the sweat of his brow, he would finish it in a couple days, and he would take on new projects, but in a different position. He didn't know how to confess. He wasn't raised that way. He knew that if he ever became a boss, he'd still talk to the guys he came to work with at the same time. The clock showed that it was time for lunch break, but Stephen didn't notice it. He continued to sit at his desk and finish the project. His phone rang. It was Robert. "Hi. What are you? Eating office paper or shelf dust? Come on out. We're waiting for you. You got 5 minutes, or are we all gonna have to sit on paper and dust and water today? I've earned it all." "No, go on without me. I grabbed a coffee in the office and I'm fine. There's only a few sheets left. Maybe I'll finish it today." "Well, if you decide to finish it today, you let us know so we can get the rest of the master's signatures." "Yeah, sure. You'll be the first to know." "Oh, great. Have you changed your mind about lunch yet?" "No, it's fine. You're without me today, but okay." Stephen hung up and heard footsteps in the hallway. Someone hadn't left for lunch either. He didn't think much of it. He went to work on the project with renewed vigor. 4 pages and a few signatures separated him from success. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. When it opened, it was the girl he had met yesterday in the elevator. "Good afternoon again, Stephen. We haven't met. I'm new to the billing department. I've been sent to sign some estimates." "Girls, they've been emailed to you, and you're not saying a word." "I'm Evelyn, by the way. Nice to meet you." "Evelyn, since we're on a first-name basis, you can call me Stephen." "Oh yeah, sorry. I forgot about the mail. Would it be easier for you if I signed this way or electronically?" "It doesn't really make any difference. But if I'm already here, maybe you could sign this way." He took the folder of documents from her hands and started signing. He didn't know what to talk to her about, and because of that, he signed the documents in complete silence. Evelyn was more determined and spoke. "It's lunchtime. So why you?" "Oh, sorry. Why are you sitting here?" Lost track of time. "Finalizing a project. A few pages left. That's why I didn't see the email and forgot about lunch. I think I'll just grab a coffee and get back to work. There's a great coffee shop on the 3rd floor of the building next door. Been there a couple times, which is where I'm headed now. Keep me company. I was thinking of just having coffee from the coffee machine, but since you're recommending it, why not? Then we'll get the paperwork out and we can go." "Yeah, that's a great idea. How do you want it?" "Knock on the door. I'll come out." She nodded and left the office. Stephen was overwhelmed with feelings of unknown origin. When she spoke to him, he was lost. When he came to his senses, he rummaged in his bag for his purse. Then it would be fun to forget all the money and cards. The weather outside was nasty, with gusts of wind knocking umbrellas out of people's hands and hats flying off. It was as if nature was trying to tell him something, but he didn't believe in such moments. A couple minutes later, there was a knock on the door. Stephen stood up, caught his jacket, and left the office. Stephen decided to dilute the situation. Silence with conversation. Great weather outside. What do you think? I agree with you. It's great if you don't go outside. We're lucky that there are passageways between the buildings so we don't have to go outside. How did you get here? I transferred from a small branch. I found my ceiling there, and I'm still getting there. I see you haven't been in one place for long either. A week ago, when I applied for the job, the office was empty. Yeah, well, I used to work on 8, but after I proved myself, I moved to 14. That's not bad. There's the coffee shop. They entered a small cafe that was on the 3rd floor. When they stepped inside, the smell of roasted grains hit their noses. They went to the counter and placed their order. After they ordered, they sat down at a table by the window, both looking out the window and laughing at another umbrella flying from a man. At this time, Camille was sitting at home reading her book, and the desire to get up and do something had completely left her body. She was looking forward to the evening when her beloved husband would arrive from work, and they could spend time together before coffee. Stephen and Evelyn began to get ready for work. Again, they had a long walk to the 14th floor of another building. Stephen loved stairs, but Evelyn talked him into taking the elevator ride. He agreed. When they made their way to their building, they called the elevator. Outside, the enemy was beginning to rage. They stepped into the elevator. Stephen pressed the button for the 14th floor, and the elevator touched. For a second, his stomach was at the bottom of the elevator cab. In so many years, he still couldn't get used to this kind of ride. A thunderstorm hit the transformer. The lights in the entire building went out for a second. The elevator car stopped. A second later, the emergency power to the entire building and the elevator cab lights came back on. Communication was fading, and there wasn't enough to reach anyone. Half the staff was now still at lunch. Jenna's chances of rescue in the shortest possible time were minimal. Stephen pressed the call button for the dispatcher, but no one answered. The dispatcher had apparently left for lunch as well. One could only hope that security would see the error and check the elevator for people. The dim lighting was reminiscent of the old light from the bulb in his room when he was a kid. Stephen noted the 13:27 time the elevator was stuck. He decided to speak up to lighten the mood. Evelyn, how are you doing? All right? Yeah, I'm fine. Except for the fact that we're stuck and there's no one to rescue us. In this weather, we can't wait for the elevator guys to get here and open this elevator. We're out of options, so let's sit on the floor and wait to be rescued. She sat down in the corner of the elevator. Stephen sat down across from her. She appeared sad. It was starting to get cold in the elevator car. The air conditioners weren't working either. Stephen took off his jacket and slipped it over Evelyn's shoulders. She smiled back. They were silent for a moment. Stephen tried to think of a topic of conversation, but nothing came to mind. In the dim light, he tried to get a good look at the girl. She had long, beautiful white hair, eyes he couldn't see no matter how hard he tried. The wind howled through the elevator shaft. Looking down at the floor, Stephen noticed that Evelyn was looking at him too. Stephen, it's almost 2:00 p.m. Try calling someone again. I will. Stephen got to his feet and started pressing the dispatcher's call button. There was no response to his calls. Stephen tried banging on the elevator car so that someone would hear him, but his attempts were unsuccessful. It was getting cold in the elevator car. She'd always dreamed of spending all day in an iron coffin. At least there's company. I'm really cold. Why don't you sit next to me so you won't be so cold? Stephen moved from one side of the elevator to the other, where Evelyn was sitting. She was shaking. Stephen thought of nothing better than to put his arms around her. After a couple minutes, she stopped shaking. An hour of confinement passed. No one responded to the banging and shouting. Tension and fear were gradually building. Evelyn clutched more and more tightly to Stephen. He, too, was beginning to freeze, but he did not give any sign. Once their gazes met, Evelyn smiled and turned her head away from him. Stephen became frightened. What if he did something terrible that he would regret for the rest of his life? Evelyn lay on top of him. Stephen began to warm little by little, and he forgot about his bad thoughts that were visiting him. An hour and a half after they were stuck, dispatch answered the phone. But just as Evelyn had said, due to bad weather, the wizards couldn't reach them. The director sent the staff home. A dispatcher who was trying to call the foreman and 2 inmates in the elevator remained in the building. It was past 200 hours of confinement. The wind was forgetting heavily in the elevator shaft. Evelyn was looking into his eyes again. And then something happened that for the rest of his life he would regret. Something that for the rest of his life he would regret. She kissed him, and he didn't kiss her back. After a couple more seconds, she kissed him again, but more passionately. For a second, his brain turned off the light. And when it returned, Stephen was kissing Evelyn in return. Passion possessed them. Now they forgot they were cold. They were tearing things off each other. She kissed his neck on the lips. Going lower, it felt good. He held her from behind by her hair. Evelyn was moaning. Stephen couldn't stop. He held her breasts and she begged for more. An hour later, they started to get dressed. Stephen's mind was a mess. What had he done? How had this happened? Why exactly was he stuck in the elevator with her? The dispatcher replied that the crew had arrived and would release them now. A moment later, the elevator doors opened and they were released. Evelyn handed Stephen his jacket and winked. All evening he couldn't come to his senses. When he was in the elevator, he felt good. But now he was writhing in anger at himself for what he had done. While his wife slept peacefully at home, he had betrayed her. Pulling into the parking lot, he sat in the car for a long time, hesitant to get out. After gathering his strength, he got out of the car and walked towards the stairs, opening the apartment door. On the threshold, he saw his wife. She was standing there smiling. He smiled back at her and hugged her, kissing her. Going into the bathroom, he looked at his reflection. It seemed disgusting to him. He got out of the bathroom and went to change. Camille noticed something wrong when he came out of the room. She asked, "Honey, are you okay? You've been weird today. You haven't been answering your cell phone. What happened? Tell me." "It's not a big deal. It's just a lightning strike knocked out a transformer today. And I was in the elevator for hours. I was freezing cold and tired. I'm sorry I couldn't answer the phone. I was losing the connection. It's okay. Why don't I give you a hot bath?" "No, thanks. If you don't mind, let's go to bed early tonight." "Okay." She finished her sentence, kissed him, and went to the couch to watch the show. Stephen headed toward the shower. For about 10 minutes he stood under the boiling water and tried to understand the nature of his actions. He had never been attracted to other girls. He was in love and faithful to only one. But what was it today? How dare he decide to take such a dastardly step? All night long he couldn't close his eyes. The picture of what happened in the elevator flashed before his eyes. His wife was sleeping peacefully beside him. Looking at her, he hated himself. It was only towards morning that he was able to fall asleep. When he woke up in the morning, he had no energy. He called his boss and said that because of yesterday's incident, he had a cold and would stay home to work. The supervisor agreed, and Stephen hung up the phone. Camille had gone to the university in the morning. Stephen was left alone with his thoughts. All day long he had been finishing his project, but he could not get over yesterday's incident. He promised that he would never take such a step again. He didn't know what fate had in store for him. All day long he sat alone. He rarely answered messages or calls. Evening came. He realized it was getting dark outside and called Camille. She was just about to dial him. "Hey, where are the couples over to pick you up?" Hi. Yeah, we're out. No, love, don't come. My friend's driving me home. How are you feeling better? You scared me last night. I came in dead tired. I'm worried about you. Be careful. Okay, I'll wait for you at home. Come home soon. 20 minutes later, she came home. The smile never left her face. She jumped on top of her husband and started kissing him. It helped a little to forget yesterday's situation. They spent the whole evening together like they used to, watching TV, eating all sorts of goodies and being happy together. This evening helped Stephen to sleep properly. He felt good with his wife. The next morning he was going to work. His strength was overflowing. After completing his morning ritual, alarm clock, shower and coffee, he left the apartment. The mood was combative. Today he wanted to finish a project and take on something new. When he pulled into the parking lot of his work, he noticed his coworkers. They were standing around gossiping before work as usual. He got out of the car and headed in their direction. Look, it's our stuck boss. How can you sit in an iron closet without a means of communication? They laughed out loud. Stephen smiled in return. He didn't want to remember what had happened that afternoon. Looking around the parking lot, he did not notice Evelyn's car. He wanted to minimize contact with her as much as possible, but he was stuck. It's not that big of a deal. And I'll see how you feel when you're in that situation. They laughed amicably and went to their workstations. In the afternoon, Stephen finished the project and sent it to his director. In the meantime, Kevin called and told him to collect signatures. A few hours later, Stephen was called into the CEO's office. When he entered the office, he sat down in a chair. Oh, Stephen, I need you. We are sending you on a business trip to Kaliningrad. You will defend your project in front of investors so that they know where their money is invested. I've looked through the documentation. It's well written. Well done. Keep it up. You'll be leaving the day after tomorrow. You don't have to come to work tomorrow. Get some rest. There's a conference on Saturday. Hotel and transportation will be paid by the branch, so don't be afraid to go. Now, excuse me, I have an urgent call. Rising from the director's chair, he went to a far room and argued with someone. After the conversation, Stephen was going to go home to rest for a couple days and hit the road. He took the stairs down to the parking lot, counting each step, texting his wife that he would be home soon. He received a heartfelt text in reply. On the way home, he stopped at a flower store and bought a gorgeous bouquet. When he arrived home, Camille had not yet returned from her studies. He decided while she was gone, he would have time to take a shower. While he was in the shower, Camille came home. She saw the gorgeous bouquet and heard the sounds from the shower. With the speed of a bullet, she undressed and ran to him. The unexpected encounter shocked him. They started kissing. Stephen was biting her neck, pressing her against the wall. Love blazed in his chest. When they got out of the shower, Stephen decided to have a serious talk with his beloved. I am sent on a business trip for a few days to Kaliningrad. I hope you don't mind my departure. I handed in my project today, and the director liked it. He's sending me to a conference to defend it. I want investors to like it, so they'll take it. Okay, I'm gonna miss you a lot, but trust that you'll beat me. Call me every day. I'll always find time to answer you. They spent 2 days together. Stephen did the packing. Camille took her homework home to spend her last days with her lover. She had little time to spend with him, and she wanted to fly away with him but couldn't. Her studies kept her busy all day. They lay on the couch and watched movies. Stephen would order food so he wouldn't waste time cooking. Camille laughed a lot. It had been a long time since she had been with her lover for such a long time. It was the day of departure. Camille had left for her couple's flight in the morning, but they had time to say goodbye. Stephen hailed a cab and packed the last of his belongings in his bag. The hour ride to the airport through traffic flew by. Stephen paid and walked towards the airport. After passing through security, he entered the main waiting room. In his head, he was thinking about how he would present his project to the investors. In his head, the picture of this conference was forming perfectly. He was confident in himself and his project. When they announced that the plane was boarding passengers, Stephen got up from the couch and walked toward the checkpoint. After checking his boarding pass, Stephen was already walking down the ramp to the plane. A couple of moments, and the plane is already in the sky. Stephen unbuckled his seatbelt, leaned back, and fell asleep. A few hours later, he was awakened by the flight attendant and asked to buckle up and raise the backrest. A soft landing. Stephen was already met by a young guy with his first and last name on a sign. He invited Stephen into his car and took him to the hotel. Stephen, tired from the flight, went into the room and immediately fell on the bed. He slept until the evening. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Stephen woke up with one eye, looked at the door, and could not understand whether he was dreaming or not. Then there was another knock on the door. He went to the door and opened it. When he saw the person standing behind the door, Stephen was ready to fall under the ground. Standing behind the door was Evelyn. Her long white hair covered part of her face. You could tell by the look on her face that she was happy to see him. "Hi. I missed you. That day spent in the elevator is keeping me busy. I fell in love with you every day. You're all I think about. Let me pass." "Yeah, hi." "Sure, go ahead." When he saw her, he forgot how to talk again. She was wearing a red, slinky evening gown. Passion flashed in his eyes. The world ceased to exist for him. "Evelyn, why are you the one? I don't mean my number, but in general, I, like you, came to defend a project, but not written by me, but a regular old project to confirm its relevance." Stephen couldn't help himself. He walked over to her and kissed her passionately on the lips. He was blown away. Clothes flew in all directions. Screams, moans, notes, passions of love came from behind the door. He realized that once again he had snapped, but he couldn't do anything about it. A couple hours passed, both of them exhausted. They collapsed on the bed. The urge to talk was there, but there was no energy to do so. Waking up in the morning to the alarm clock, Stephen went to shower as usual, not noticing the mayhem of last night's lovemaking. As he adjusted the water and stood under the stream, someone touched him from behind with cold hands. It was Evelyn. She began kissing him, moving lower and lower. There was plenty of time before the conference started, and they could afford to love each other at this moment. Stephen couldn't stop. He felt different with her. They did not leave his room until the evening. Not infrequent screams came from the room. Before the conference, they showered and began to pack. Stephen put on his best suits, prepared his laptop. When he was called, he went on stage and began to broadcast about his project. You could see from the investors' faces that they were interested. Stephen's speech lasted 15 minutes. He left to great applause. Evelyn spoke much later than he did. In order not to waste time, he went to his room to call the director. As he walked down the hall, he called the director and told him that everything had gone excellently, and perhaps his project would be approved on the basis of the company's work. Make arrangements with the director. He decided to call his wife and make her happy. The dial tone went on, but no one picked up. Stephen, while entering the room, when Camille answered, Stephen stood in a stupor. The whole room was turned upside down. Clothes were lying on the floor underneath. Women's underwear was almost everywhere. Stephen came to the realization that for almost 2 days he had not left the room with her, that he had lost his mind again. But then he heard his wife's voice. "Hello, honey, you're there. And I've been telling you for a minute. I can hear it's you." "Yeah. Hello, sweetheart. I'm doing great. My project is about to be approved. And I'm really glad I came here. I miss you. I miss you very much. I'll be there soon." Before Camille could answer, the connection was lost. When Stephen tried to call, nothing happened. Forgetting everything, Stephen began to clean and put his room in order. When the conference was over, people went to the banquet room. They were drinking, talking. Evelyn tried to find Stephen, but could not. She decided to check his room. When she knocked, she noticed the door was open. In the room, Stephen was cleaning up a mess of consequences, passion, and love. Gone somewhere. I'm tired of looking for you. Something's happened. Sit down, please. I need to talk to you. When I'm around you, I forget how to breathe. I enjoy spending time with you immensely. But I'm married in the city. My wife is waiting for me at home. I'm sorry. I can't see you anymore. I know you're married. That doesn't stop me. I love you and I don't want you to give up on me. I promise I'll make you happier. Stephen didn't say anything. He just left the room and went for a walk around the city at night. Little cars flew through the narrow streets. He realized that he was being an idiot, but he didn't want to lose them both. When they flew in from the conference, they began to meet often, either in his office or in his car in the parking lot. When he came home, he would forget about Evelyn and spend time with his wife. This continued until Camille began to notice her husband's strange behavior. He would come home very tired from work. The perpetual smell of perfume from his suit and feminine hair was alarming. For winter vacation, Camille offered to go for a ride to her parents' house, but Stephen couldn't go. No matter how much Camille urged him, she agreed to go alone. But Stephen promised to come back in a few days. On the day Camille left, her husband behaved strangely all morning, walking around with his phone, just swearing. When she approached Camille, she was scared. She didn't know what was going on. They said goodbye. Stephen left for work, and Camille waited for the time to call a cab and leave for the train station. Before leaving, she decided to clean up a little. She decided to vacuum her room. She started in the corners and gradually moved to the bed, but her attention was attracted by an object under the bed. When she pulled it out, she was horrified. It was someone's blue panties. She knew she didn't have such underwear in her closet. Anger overwhelmed her. She wanted to call her husband and tell him, but she guessed why her husband was acting like this. She decided to wait for them. She hid the suitcase on the balcony and sat on the sofa. But when she heard the key in the door turn and ran to her room, finding someone else's panties under the bed, the wife hid in the closet to incriminate her husband. And when she saw who came to him, she fell out of there with her mouth open. She recognized her. It was her cousin Evelyn. All their lives they'd been rivals. But this was crossing all boundaries. She saw their faces, picked up her suitcase from the balcony, and walked towards the exit. On the street, Stephen caught her. He fell to his knees, begging for forgiveness. In silly ways, he tried to stop her, but he couldn't. She, proudly raising her head, walked forward. She had already figured it all out for herself. She just wanted to leave, to go home to her parents. Tears were falling from her face in hail, but she walked straight ahead without listening to the sounds her husband was making. She had gone home and didn't want to go back, but because of her studies, she was able to get over herself. She never told anyone what had happened or where Stephen was. To such questions, she just shrugged her shoulders. That's how the month flew by. In the city, the exams were approaching and Camille was about to go. When she arrived in the city, the first thing she did was to rent an apartment. 4 days in a row, she went to her exams and closed out with a perfect score. Every day, Stephen would snip her phone. Every minute he was calling, texting, but she couldn't answer. She wanted a quiet life, but she loved him very much. She couldn't forget that little boy in tattered pants with the broken knees and elbow. The boy who loved math but sometimes misunderstood how to solve it. She loved him madly. She didn't want to think about how and what had happened between her sister and him. On nights, heartbreaking screams echoed in her apartment. She didn't know what she wanted for herself. On the one hand, a lover she had spent half her life with. On the other, a man who had sneakily betrayed her. At the same time, Stephen called another 100 times. After that fateful day, he did not see Evelyn. She tried to meet, went to his home at work, but could get no answers. He had withdrawn far into himself, working, studying. But when he came home, he tried every possible way to reach her, talk to her girlfriends and friends. But nothing gave confidence. After dialing another classmate of his wife's, he got a reply. He found out where Camille was living now. She lived a few blocks away from him. After work, he drove to the address, locating her window by the apartment number. He waited for the lights to come on so he could go and talk to her. Several hours passed. Dusk was descending on the city. There were fewer and fewer people on the street. Stephen didn't know what to do. He just sat and waited. He wanted to scream, but he couldn't go on without her. Camille had been standing in that yard for a long time. She saw the car and her husband. She didn't dare to go home. But in her mind, two camps were warring, love and hate. She frantically froze, insisted on going. She hesitated to go. He might not have noticed her, but suddenly he would. Several hours passed like that. Stephen continued to call and write. Camille did not answer him. She just wanted to be alone for a while. Alone, she wanted to rest and sort herself out. She knew she would never find another man like Stephen again, but she was scared to start all over again. Gathering all her willpower into a fist, she walked toward the car. Opening the door, she got into her seat and turned on the heater. Stephen was silent, but he wanted to speak. Camille beat him to it. You know, there's good and evil in me right now. Evil is telling me to run away from you, and good says to try to give you one last chance. Just understand one thing. I loved you madly. I would have given my life for you, but you betrayed me. I didn't want to come back here. After that meeting, I moved back in with my parents. No one knows about our relationship. I've been thinking a lot, and I don't know what decision to make. Just give me some time. I can't concentrate when you call 100 times a day. And I hear you. I won't call you anymore. I won't bother you. Please, just give me one last chance. I love you very much. You're my one and only. I hope you understand me. Take me home. Know that if we live together, it doesn't mean anything. Don't you dare touch me. It's a deal. Stephen nodded silently. A fire of emotions raged inside. He was simultaneously glad to have her around, and he was hurt that he had failed her now in the hardest part of keeping her rules. He was afraid of failing and snapping. Well, then she would go. Camille, falling asleep in the car first. The city was intentionally stuck in traffic, advancing on the subway. Stephen looked at his wife and was glad she was there. In all that time, he would never think of her sister again. Not until decades from now, when he would get his hands on a picture of his aunt holding Camille and Camille's mom holding Evelyn. When they reached home, Stephen didn't want to wake her. He carefully unbuckled her seatbelt, picked her up in his arms, and carried her home. At home, he put her on the bed and went to change his clothes. When Camille woke up, she realized that the bed was different. Stephen, in moments of rage, had torn up all the furniture that could in any way remind him of Evelyn. He wanted her out of his life. For 2 months, he lived alone. A lot of things changed in his life during that time. He changed the furniture, renovated the apartment at work for a project, and became the lead director of Evelyn's branch. Evelyn never showed up for work again. She quit her job and transferred back to her branch. Where did she come from? Camille smelled coffee and left the room. Stephen sat with his back to her and drank coffee. He didn't know what he could do. He sat there thinking, but when he realized that the mug that was next to him was gone, he turned around. Camille was standing behind him and drinking coffee from the mug. At that moment, he wanted to run up, take her in his arms, and kiss her, but he was afraid to. For the next month, every day after work and school, Stephen picked up Camille and they drove to the marriage counselor's office. Stephen was ashamed, but he overcame himself and went for a long time. Camille did not let Stephen near her, but knew that he had not changed. Often he brought goodies, gave her flowers, spent time with her. She could see he was trying, but she couldn't let it all go and start trusting again. She was afraid he might snap again, but she believed in him. They started spending more time with her parents. Every weekend they visited them. Her parents hinted at grandchildren. Camille just laughed and nodded her head. She was on the road to trusting her husband. Stephen began to take frequent business trips, but not alone. He always took his wife with him, so she knew he was alone. When he agreed to her rules, he knew what he was getting into. He knew she might not begin to trust, but he rejoiced like a child every day they lived together. They began to travel a lot. Every 6 months, a new country. Camille learned several languages and was fluent in English. She was interested to hear what Stephen chatted about with his foreign colleagues. She loved the Museum of Art. When Stephen signed another contract, she spent hours walking through museums, exhibitions, loved to go to the opera and ballet. Sometimes Stephen would go with her. Rarely there were moments when she remembered the past. She cried a lot. Stephen saw this, and at such moments she just wanted to be alone. Such moments he would make her coffee and leave the room. If she asked, he would stay. They were madly in love and didn't want to lose each other. Yes, the psychologist Camille stayed at home a lot and did not go out anywhere except for her studies. The psychologist gave her a little confidence in herself and in her choice. At first, Stephen used to take off work early to be close by. Gradually, he evened out his work schedule. He was confident that she was okay. She began to trust gradually. He started going out more. Stephen took her to that amusement park they had been to for the first time a few years ago. He was insanely pleased when she laughed. She was starting her life over again. Stephen would wake up many times in his life in a cold sweat and with the fear that he was alone. One day, Camille came home in a good mood, cooked a lovely dinner, bought some beautiful new lacy lingerie, and decided to please her husband. Stephen did not know about it. After saying goodbye to his colleagues, he got into his car and drove home. On the way, he stopped at a flower shop. He bought a small bouquet and drove home. He pulled into the parking lot, parked his car, and got out. He didn't like elevators. That's why he walked home by taking the stairs every day. He walked to the door and started to open it with his keys. His wife was already preparing a surprise. When he opened the door, he was amazed. In the hall in the middle of the room was a table with a fine dinner on it. Candles were burning. Camille had put on some music. Camille looked extraordinary. She was wearing a transparent robe. Under the robe, the beautiful lingerie was visible. The evening went unusually well. My husband liked Camille's presence. She was also delighted. A few days passed after the dinner and Camille became ill at home. Unexplained symptoms appeared in her. She was frightened and went to the hospital. Stephen did not know anything. At the doctor's appointment, she was told that she was going to be a mom. She was happy, but would Stephen be happy? In the evening, she decided to talk to him about it. Stephen came home earlier than usual, took a shower, and started working at home. Camille came up to him and spoke to him. "Can I distract you for a second?" Stephen pushed the computer away and had his full attention. "Here's the thing. I'm slowly learning to trust you again. You're there for me every day, and I appreciate it. You and I fly to other countries a lot, and we go to my parents' house more often. Thank you. Yes, sometimes I get mad at you, but just know that I love you madly and do not want to lose you. You're doing great. Becoming a top director, getting a college degree, and always in development. I'm afraid to tell you one thing. I only found out about it today. As you are my favorite, I'm pregnant." Hearing these words, Stephen felt like the happiest man on earth. First, he started jumping and screaming. Then he ran up to his wife and started hugging her, started kissing her belly. Camille saw tears in his eyes. He was truly overjoyed at the news. The next month, Stephen prepared the room for the baby, renovated it, bought different furniture. He was insanely excited about the birth of his first child. At night, he would get up and look for fruit at the stores. Even in winter, Camille herself did not know what she wanted. Stephen began to spend all his time with his family. He moved the management of the company off his laptop. He would talk to Camille and joke around, watch movies with her. Sometimes he'd get dragged to a young mom's practice. He gave all his time to his wife. A month before the birth, they drove around the city to clinics and looked for a doctor who would deliver the baby. Stephen could not think how many specialists they would have to go through to find the right doctor. There was a bag at home in case it was not foreseeable, happened, and they needed to leave quickly. And so it happened. Stephen and Camille were sleeping peacefully. Then Stephen wakes up to Camille pushing his arm. "What's wrong? What's the matter? Should I get some water or call an ambulance?" "No, I'm hanging in there. Come on, let's go to the hospital." In a few minutes, Stephen got dressed and carried all the necessary things to the car. Camille took the elevator down and did breathing exercises. Stephen helped her into the car, got in, started the engine himself, and drove to the hospital. Stephen was afraid of being late, but it was scary to drive fast. Camille drove calmly and just breathed while the baby's father was more nervous than she was. She could see him trying, talking to her, but his hands were shaking. About 40 minutes passed. They pulled into the hospital courtyard. Stephen helped his wife to get out of the car and walk to the hospital. The doctors took her to the maternity ward. Stephen was not allowed in. After 6 o'clock, the doctor came out and said Rich was born. "You can go to your wife's room." Stephen thanked him and went towards her room. When he entered the room, he cried. His son was lying on his wife's chest asleep. He had his mom's facial features and his dad's nose. Stephen kissed his wife and stood looking at them while tears flew from his face in hail. A few days later, Camille and little Sasha were discharged from the hospital. All relatives and friends came to the discharge. The mothers rejoiced that they had become grandmothers, and Stephen became a great-grandmother. She sat down on the bench and cried. Camille's father looked at his grandson and did not want to give him up. The baby smiled as his daddy took him in his arms. At that moment, Stephen realized that in an instant he could lose it. He promised himself that this situation would never happen again, and he would not leave his family alone. Their family was never in trouble again in their lives. The child grew by leaps and bounds. Stephen was busy with his son almost all the time. Stephen worked in the company, a director, spent a lot of time with his family, and was a kind man. A few years later, Camille gave birth to his second child. Stephen loved his children and gave them all the things he did not have as a child. Most importantly, he gave a man's education. After a few years, they began to travel with the children. Sasha found foreign languages easy, but Denmark had only recently begun to learn them. Now she would give anything to see her husband alive. He left very early. No one could think that such a sturdy man's health could fail. That's what happened. He was on his way home from work, called his wife, and warned her that he would be home soon. As usual, he stopped at a flower store, bought a bouquet of daisies, and headed home. But then something went wrong, and he had a heart attack while driving. He drove into a fence. The speed was slow. Kind people pulled him out of the car and called an ambulance. His heart weakened every minute. His wife and children came to the hospital. They looked at him and cried, and he was calming everyone down and telling everyone to calm down, and that he had no regrets about his life, except for one moment. A few days later, he passed away. His heart couldn't take the strain and stopped. Camille cried long and hard, but we can no longer return with tears. When he passed away at their home address, a lawyer came to read the will. In the will, Stephen had many kind words to say about his wife, his children, the employees of his company. He didn't say much about himself, but there was one phrase, "Thank you, all thank you. I have lived a full life and am proud of what I have achieved." Stephen's passing was a tremendous loss to their family. They loved him. He taught his children a lot, raised the company he worked for to unreleased heights. He was a good man. At the funeral, hundreds of people spoke kind words about him. Before he died, he confessed that on the day of the terrible thunderstorm he met Evelyn. They were stuck in an elevator. That's how they met. He called that day the day the earth turned over. It was several years after his death. But Camille never got used to living without him. Every detail in the house reminded her of him. Every picture hanging on the wall told a story. Camille remembered how her husband used to hang those pictures. Several days in a row he'd been meaning to get started, but he'd been distracted either by a call from work or the kids deciding to attack the folder. but he was on his way to his goal. Monday morning, Stephen and his wife sent the kids off to their grandmother's. He turned off his cell phone and got down to business. Camille was in charge of the process. Why did she find herself the culprit from time to time? She knew her husband loved her madly and could put up with her. Camille wanted the pictures to be able to hang evenly throughout the room, not in one spot. Stephen listened patiently to his beloved's task. He pulled out a drill and began drilling into the wall. Dust and plaster flew from the wall in all directions. Camille was already imagining who was going to do the cleaning. After finishing drilling holes in one wall, Stephen started hammering in the hole. The holes were at the same level and the same distance apart. With a quarter of the work done, Camille kissed her husband. The atmosphere had diffused. Stephen began to listen more calmly to his wife's task. About drilling holes, he began to place the second wall. It was smaller, but that didn't make it any easier. When Stephen drilled a hole, Camille's ears would pop and she would cover them with her hands. It was at this point that Stephen would make jokes at her and pretend as if he was yelling at her. She fell for his jokes a few times, but then she stopped. They had spent the entire day improving this room. There was a thick layer of dust on the floor of the room. At first, Camille tried to sweep it up, but it was not a good idea. Having finished the work, Stephen began to help sweep. His wife's help was needed, though she refused to help. Stephen divided up the duties. He swept the dust all over the floor, and Camille wiped down the walls. When Stephen finished sweeping the floors, his wife kicked him out and began scrubbing the floors. At this time, Stephen began wiping down the picture frames. So many memories were held in those pictures. At that moment, he didn't know that a year and a half later, his picture with a black ribbon would be standing in the corner of the same room. But now he was happy that the work was almost finished. When his wife was scrubbing the floors, he helped her carry the bucket of water and brought the frames. Camille looked at her lover with tired eyes. She wanted to finish her work as soon as possible and lie down to rest. Between rest and her came these pictures. For the next couple of hours, sounds, swearing and bickering were heard from their room. They couldn't agree on how and in what order to hang them. Eventually, the photos were hung from left to right in chronological order. A few controversial photos hung in the same place. The couple couldn't remember exactly when the photos had been taken, but they didn't pay any attention to it. Camille was glad that her dream had come true. Together, they had made a room of memories that would be updated with new photos. She couldn't contain her emotions and ran into her husband's hot embrace. Stephen put his arms around her and kissed her. She looked like the little girl from the picture. Blonde hair, gathered in two pigtails, blue eyes shining with the will to give and adventure. She smiled and kissed her husband back. A couple days later, they picked up the children from their parents and brought them to this room. The children listened with interest to their dad and mom's stories and looked at the pictures. Remembering that day, tears flowed from her eyes. She could not live without him. The new day was like hard labor. Children often came to her, told her about their successes in life, what they were doing. But if they talked about their father, the family fell into silence. They loved him madly and grieved for his early departure forever. To his beloved, he would remain a little boy, wearing old clothes with abrasions on his arms and legs, who, despite adversity, always smiled and walked only forward. Camille would often come to this room and look at the pictures. She was able to forget that transgression of her husband that could have ruined everything and forever.